Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Grennan with Continuity Insights, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, How to Prepare the Workplace for a Return to Work, which will be presented by Chris Sarcletti, Program Lead for Alliant Credit Union's Business Resilience, Physical Security, Life Safety, Disaster Recovery, and Facilities Management Programs. Today's broadcast is also being sponsored by OnSolve. Bringing your employees back to the workplace safely in the midst of a crisis presents a number of office and employee challenges. A clear strategy is required to ensure employee well-being as you manage health and safety protocols, social distancing, disinfecting and cleaning, supplies, and office culture. During today's webinar, we'll be discussing a number of return-to-work considerations, including when and how you should return, hoteling, in-office protocols, employee culture, long-term real estate concerns, and cost concerns. But before we get started, I'd just like to review a few items with you. Throughout today's presentation, you will have the opportunity to submit questions by typing into the questions pane of your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them at the conclusion of the webinar. Today's webinar will also be recorded for later on-demand viewing, and as a registered participant, you will receive a link to this recording. I would now like to introduce our presenter. As I mentioned, Chris Sarcletti is the Program Lead for Alliant Credit Union's Business Resilience Programs. Chris has over 25 years of financial services experience in risk management and consulting, and he has significant experience managing business continuity, incident and crisis management, and life safety at numerous organizations. In addition, he has piloted and rolled out active shooter training awareness and education programs at 2 organizations and is a leader within the Chicagoland Business Resilience community, serving as a board member on the Business Resilience Professionals Association. Please welcome Chris Sarcletti.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate it. So thanks for having me here today. I'm excited to talk a little bit about how my organization, Alliant Credit Union, is handling the return to work. So to start, I just wanted to give a quick overview of Alliant Credit Union. So we are a Chicago-based digital credit union with customers across the country. One of our key focus areas is to make banking easiest as possible for our members and make the experience easier. When I say we're digital, we're completely digital. We have no branches. Historically, we have had branches throughout the country because we do have customers throughout the country. But we have, over the course of many years, been on a path towards becoming a digital organization. So we're a completely digital organization with no branches. We are, as a credit union, a not-for-profit financial cooperative, and that means that all of our members are owners. We have a long history, only 85 years of history, and we're over $12 billion in assets. So we're the largest credit union in Illinois and one of the largest in the nation. A few other things that we're particularly proud of is we've been named Best Credit Union in 2018 by Money Magazine, and routinely we are honored by the best workplaces in Chicago. Last year we were number 3 on the list, in 2020. So that's something we're proud of as a workplace where people enjoy their experience coming to work every day, or in this case, working remotely. By the numbers, like over 500,000 members, 12 billion in assets, over 12 billion. We have over 700 employees, and we have 2 office locations, which are both in the Chicagoland area.
Excuse me, Chris, before we go any further, could I ask you to please just close your control panel? I believe it's being shown on the screen.
Is that better?
It is. You just need to then put it back in presenter view.
Okay.
We're still seeing your preview slide. Let's see if we can get that off before we go forward. There we go. Looks good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I want to jump into our return to work considerations. So these are some of the things that that my team has continued to work through. And this is a fluid process, and we're kind of going through it as we speak. So a lot of it has to do with timing. So we've been trying to work across the organization to determine when we can bring our workforce back to work. And there's a lot of different variables and a lot of key partners that in this journey that we've been engaged with. This includes human capital or human resources. It goes by human capital in our organization. The risk management function, which I'm a part of. Technology, a key partner in getting things ready. Legal, and other areas, operations, of course. But it really goes to the whole company. So on some of the things that we really been thinking about, it's like, what guidance do we follow? We have, while we do have our employees in Illinois, and for the most part, and that seems like, wow, that should be easier. It's one state, but we don't have all of our employees in Illinois because we have some remote employees. Maybe we got 25 to 50 people that live in various states throughout the country. So you get into just different guidance, and it gets very complicated, especially from a human capital perspective. Also looking at what guidance is followed. There's city guidance. The city of Chicago has some very strong guidance and strong travel guidelines and whatnot. And I know these exist in other parts of the country also, but they're different from city to city. And Chicago's are pretty stringent on people traveling back and forth to the office. We've even run into situations where someone was going to come into office to pick up their equipment, but we didn't realize that they actually live in Wisconsin. And I'm not privy to that information necessarily. So I was alerted of this, and then we have to say, oh, actually, you can't come in because you live in Wisconsin, and you're going to be actually breaking the travel guideline to come in and clean out your office. Because maybe as part of the clean out, we're trying to clean out our office so we can get it ready for what it's going to look like in the future. Or maybe just someone needed something for work. So there's a lot of different variables of what guidance to follow. You get into state and then federal. So the city and state has been rather easy for us. It's been kind of in line with I guess we're fortunate in that matter that Illinois and Chicago are pretty following the same rules. Some states not as much. Federal, then you're looking at what is the federal guidance, what kind of federal guidance were we getting, and that gets into like the CDC guidance and whatnot. So it's really determining. There wasn't a one answer here. We usually stuck with, for us, the city guidance of the city of Chicago, because we're in Cook County, was best for us, and then using the federal and state, using the CDC guidance. But this has been complicated, and it's required constant review in terms of the travel restrictions and whatnot. So it's been an interesting process for sure. Regarding the use of consultants to assist with planning for return to work. So I put this in here because, going back to March, April of last year, we began to engage with some consultants to discuss some things that were already working with us on regarding long-term real estate. But then we got into this, kind of changed, obviously it changed things for so many, to how are we going to use our space when we do come back? So we worked with an organization called Gensler to help design our space so that we could repurpose it, so that we could space it out. So it's safe, safety being the number one concern. I bring this up because this is something that we were, fortunate that we had this existing relationship in place, and we can pivot to use this organization to help us. But that was something we needed to kind of know up front, really, to do this. It doesn't mean we couldn't have done it ourselves, but it made it easier, and we're a lean organization to help us understand how we can best utilize our space to make it safe for a return to work. So this was a key thing for us that we engaged in. Some other things, like how many staff will be coming in? Like what numbers are you looking at when you start to think about these things? Is it a phased in approach? And where are you going to? If you were 700 people, are we going towards 700, or what's our target? Is it 200, 300, 400? And you look at the timeline, for that. So that those are all factors of trying to figure this out, because it's multi-tiered and it crosses a lot of different disciplines in trying to figure this out. Another key thing here: are we asking or are we telling? It depends on the organization. There are some functions, and like many organizations, we have always had essential workers that have had to come in every day. I'd say since day one of the pandemic, we have had more or less 20 people that have had to come in every day. It varies from 15 to 25. Most of those are people that are involved in operations, functions like the mail room, which cannot be done remotely. There's certain things regarding printing checks, scanning documentation, facilities related work, cleaning related work, data center related work. Again, it's not a lot, but I think there's sometimes there's an assumption that everyone can do everything from home, and that's really not possible. It is largely possible, but there are always going to be some in-office functions. So beyond that group, which was, we made accommodations to allow for safe return to work for those individuals pretty much up front, with masking, spacing things out, and whatnot. That really went. We had some, a couple incidents of people reporting COVID and whatnot, as everyone has, but it was handled, in an orderly way. It was handled safely, and the people felt safe coming into work. But and to be honest, it was a safe place to work because, you're talking about having 20 people or so in a space that can, for a space that was supposed to hold 700 and was holding 700. So people could really be spaced out. They could be put in offices or whatnot. But as we get into return to work, it's not going to no longer be 20 people in a space that's supposed to hold, 700. Now it's going to be, maybe 200 or 300 people in a space that's supposed to hold 700 coming off of a pandemic. And that's where we get into are we asking or are we telling? Is this the space is available, or is this you need to come in 2 days a week? This is something that we're struggling with ourselves right now, just to figure out. We're trying to let this happen organically, but these are some key pieces that you need to kind of know. And also working with divisional management up to the CEO, when is the right time to switch that ask to a tell? There's a lot of factors there, which we'll get into, including vaccines and whatnot. And then there's the timeline for the phased in approach. We've had a lot of starts and stops with this, and some of them have been out of our control. We had a plan to start to bring some more people back to work that really wanted to be back in the office, and it was necessary for efficiency of their function in the October, November timeframe last year. And we were kind of had things ready to go, did a lot of work to prep stuff, and then we put a hold on it with the spike, which certainly was not unexpected, the spike in the virus to happen in the late fall. But that forced us to reconsider our posture and hold back on that. So as we sit today, 4 months later, we didn't really act on what we put in place then. And we're, we've continued to work through some other options, but now we're pivoting back towards that area. So the phased in approach, I mean, you need a lot of flexibility there. I think, because safety being the number one concern, with everything being such new with this virus, it's been a year now. That's still in the infancy stages of understanding COVID-19. I mean, and when you think of it in the context of the influenza virus, which is a much different virus, but you learn different things about these things as time goes by. The how. How are you going to bring people back to work? Is it assigned spaces versus hoteling? For our organization, we used to be mostly an in-office organization, maybe 5 to 10% work from home. We've obviously pivoted to a 95% work from home over the last year. And it's worked for the most part. We've had some hiccups like everyone, but we've got it down from a technology perspective. There is some people that want to come back to work, understandably. But that's the how. So are we going to go towards assigned spaces versus hoteling? Are people returning to the office in the same footprint that they did in 2019 and early 2020? Or is it going to be drastically different? For ours situation at Alliant, it's going to be drastically different. We're going towards a hoteling concept. And there's many reasons for that, which we can get into later, because there's a lot of factors that get into this. Has the space been right-sized in terms of capacity to ensure safety? And some of these things kind of link together, including hoteling and then capacity, safety. They all come together. What I mean by this is, if you were used to having 10 cubes in an aisle or something in the old footprint, it's not going to really be possible to put people safely into that same environment in the post-COVID future. Eventually, I believe that it will be, but I'm not sure when that time will be when people feel comfortable sitting in that same type of arrangement, and it may be a while. So that's in terms of right-sizing the capacity to ensure safety. For our organization at Alliant, we did use these consultants I mentioned to help us with that, and but that was helpful. And what's the time frame for opening up more available space? This gets into the flexibility, the phased-in approach, but there could be a timeline. For us, we have a target of getting a certain number of hoteling cubes ready by a certain date, and then we're going to have another phase, and then eventually another phase. And some of this gets into vaccine availability, other things that may allow us to open up more space instead of spacing it out as much as we have. Because at our organization, I believe the space constraints to do this safely for the space that we have is we're basically using about 50% of the space that we had previously. So that's a significant drop in the space. And that includes use of conference rooms and whatnot, 50% of the spots in there too. 50% of the spots in the lunch area or the break room area. So there's a lot of considerations. When you get into hoteling, when the hoteling is the direction that our organization is going, how is this going to happen? Do you have the capability to hotel? Did you already have it? A lot of organizations that already went in that direction. We had not at Alliant. A big piece here is how you're going to reserve spots. For us, we needed to implement a hotel reservation system that allowed people to reserve spots. We've partially rolled it out and we're continuing with that rollout. But that was a big piece of us allowing to move forward with this. Is the office ready for hoteling, or is a build out required? This is a big piece. It can make it a lot easier if you're moving into a ready-made facility that handles this kind of work, hoteling style work. But if you're not, then it may require some reconfiguration and potentially a significant amount of work. For our organization at Alliant, we were able to mostly just reuse what we have and then space it out a little bit. We didn't have to reconfigure things. We basically just took half the space and made it hoteling space. But I also manage the facilities in our organization, so we have responsibility for some of this build out with technology, and it's a lot of work that sometimes I think there's an assumption we can get these things ready really quick. And it's not as quick as some people think. So that is something that people need to keep in mind when you're getting this ready. You're not going to all of a sudden get 250 cubes ready in a month unless you have a lot of resources. Another key piece, how will technology support hoteling? So when I say technology, I'm really talking about whatever you call it, your service desk, your help desk, the people that need to support people coming in. Everybody in our organization and they figured out how to work from home. It's been a year. But when they come back in, what are their expectations? How have they changed? They haven't been printing at home, but all of a sudden, are they going to expect to print again? How many printers are you going to have available? What about the questions about if a hoteling cube doesn't work? In the sense that there's issues with it. There's a lot of things that are going to just be new, and it's all going to be new to some extent. Even in our hoteling cubes, we've decided with the advent of using Microsoft Teams, and for the people that have cell phones, we've actually pulled phones. There's a soft phone solution for the people that need it. but that is something that's new. I certainly don't need a phone. I don't need a physical phone on my desk with my cell phone and Teams, but I'm used to having one. But it's just a new mindset. So these are all things that need to be considered. At the bottom, you could put it at the top if you want. Was money budgeted for these initiatives? In many instances, it was not budgeted for these things. These weren't things we foresaw right away because we didn't know what was going to happen. And money is always a concern, especially in the current environment. So that's a big piece. And if you have the foresight to budget for these things, all these things up front, you're going to be a lot better off for it.
Chris, we have a question that just came in. If you could maybe answer it.
Sure.
One of our, let me see. The question was, what hoteling vendor was used, and were you happy with their service?
So the hoteling vendor we use, it's not really a vendor. We used a company called Gensler, which works on like office design and whatnot. So they basically are, I mean, if you were going to reconfigure your space to be hoteling, or you wanted to have more collaborative space, they would help you design that and provide the blueprints and whatnot, and then you would work with someone to build it out. Gensler also has a system called WISP, WISP, which is a hotel reservation system. So basically, based on the design of your area, you can build it out. Okay, these are the cubes that are available. Here's the conference rooms, and you can put different icons in there, standing desk, other things that on there. So it's really a floor plan for your whole office. It's really nice, and then you can book spots within that within that system. It has single sign-on, allowing people to log in and book their cube for the day. We've been happy with WISP so far. We're still working through a few things with them regarding advanced booking capability, because obviously it's a scalable solution for all of their clients. It's not unique to Alliance needs, and they're trying to make some adjustments to allow for a little bit more advanced booking capability. Although I will say the advanced booking capability is an interesting thing because you want to provide that flexibility, but the idea behind how WISP is set up is that it logs you out each day and it only lets you log in, not too far in advance, which, it's kind of like, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, I guess. I mean, you want to provide that flexibility, but the reality is we're human beings, and we see this with our conference rooms conference rooms are booked through Outlook for us. A lot of times people book conference rooms. They say, "Hey, I'm having my team meeting every Monday, 2 to 3," and they book it for the whole year. Well, if WISP doesn't allow that, and that's a good thing, but it does cut down on some of the flexibility because you can't book things in advance. But when you're trying to dole out a limited amount of cubes, maybe 250 cubes are going to be used by 600 people, you don't want people going in and booking it for the year, and then, of course, they don't unbook it, and then it's gone. And taking into consideration like people traveling from other locations to come in for in-office work, there's a lot to think about there. But that was a long-winded way of saying, yeah, we've been happy with WISP so far.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
From an employee concern perspective, so a couple of things. We touched on some of this before, so I'll just delve into some additional details. Has the capacity been adjusted to ensure safety? For us, yes. I mean, we cut the number of spaces in half. One of the things there, like honestly, even another thing, one of these things that you don't really think about is, what are we supposed to do with all the chairs that are in these conference rooms that now we're not using? You can push them in the corner, I guess. You could turn them around, throw some tape over them. Then not everyone's got the space to go and just store this stuff. So that was one of the things we dealt with. We found some space to store it, or we turned them around and whatnot. But you're really trying to, ideally, we could just take them out so no one can use them no matter what, to make it as safe as possible. And we also provided signage on. We had spent quite a bit of money on signage. There's a lot of money spent on signs over the last year to put on, showing how many people can fit in here safely, with design, with visualization of it, so you can see how many are in there and whatnot. So a lot of money spent on that. What about modification to support a hybrid workforce? And we'll get into what a hybrid workforce is in a little bit, but to allow for interaction with video capabilities. So conference rooms, you got 4 people in, there's 2 people in another state, there's 2 people at home, etc. Maybe you're using Teams. Okay, you're in Teams in a conference room. Are you sitting there looking at your computer because the other people don't have capability to put this information on screens, like video screens on the wall or something, so people can interact more readily? Those are all things, and it costs money and vendors to get that in place. So these are all things we needed to think about in terms of conference rooms. And another one is using masks within conference rooms. We require the use of masks within conference rooms for when people have come in. Well, I mean, understandably, people haven't been happy with that because they're sitting in a conference room with 4 people in a room designed for 8 with a mask on. Obviously, it's not that they're unhappy with it, but it takes away the benefit of being, in the room, of seeing people's facial expressions and whatnot. So those were all things that have been considered. Cubes. Are the cubes more spaced out or are they the same? Same thing we kind of talked about a little bit in the previous slide. Yes, they're spaced out much more. The reservation system is a key piece here. The support and rollout of the reservation system. I have a team that works for me, really more on the facility side. I don't think that they had any thought in their career that they would be supporting some cube reservation rollout system. In our organization, it's, we're having to support it. The first questions, we're putting the training documentation together and all that. It's not brain surgery, but it's a different skill set to support a software. And a lot of the people that I have were not hired to do that. They're doing a great job, and we're adjusting. But it is a new piece here. Every time someone logs in and there's a question, they email our team. And then you deal with the user error things and whatnot, and just the nuances of the system that you continue to learn about. So that's definitely been a challenge. What about offices? Who decides who gets to use them? Are executives all right with hoteling? This has led to some potentially. My executive team at Alliant is all on board. Our CEO, he's wonderful. He's very much like everyone, has the same access to space, etc. But there are certain privacy discussions that need to take place for groups like human capital, legal, internal audit, others. Sometimes executives do need to be in a space for an office, but versus a cube. So these are all things we've had to kind of work through, and it's been interesting. We've had to ask executives to clean out all their stuff, take it home, just like every other employee, so that we can make the offices available and determine who gets them. We're still targeting more towards management level positions or privacy areas, which makes sense, I think, for our organization. But this is another whole consideration of how we make it known who gets to use this space. Travel. So this has been an ongoing thing from the day one of the pandemic. I remember we had some employees that were traveling to, somebody was traveling to the UK and someone else was going to Italy. And right at the infancy, we were like, can I go? Can I come back to work? And those, guys, it seems like much longer than this. It was a little over a year ago, and we were working with human capital to say, okay, no, they can't, or they can, but they have to follow these guidelines. And when that was during, the CDC's initial tier 1 and shutting down travel and whatnot. We've kind of, a lot of those things have been kept in place, and it's kind of just worked out because some countries have just blocked travel from the United States altogether. But this has been an interesting one to continue to keep our tabs on. What we've done is we've linked to a lot of the city of Chicago and guidelines that they have for travel, the places that are orange or et cetera. And we've always told them the best solution for us is just to comply with whatever the city or state is saying. rather than getting into specifics. But it is a complicated situation, because you could have people that were intended to travel in to a location, and couldn't, because they lived in a certain state, even though that, and it would be, quite frankly, very easy to unintentionally break some of these travel guidelines. So that this has been something we've had to keep constant scrutiny on. In-office protocols, a lot of things that you have to consider here with a return to work. Cleaning, how often are you going to clean? With what frequency, what time? Our organization bought an electrostatic cleaning device, which we use periodically to clean the area. It's been used after any exposures, and the small amount of exposures that we did have, and it's been used on a regular basis to clean the facility. It made sense for us to just buy one. We paid a organization to do it for us once, and I came in to meet the person and watch what they did, and it's when I saw how much it cost, we immediately pivoted and said, how much do these things cost? It's a chlorine-based solution, you're using them, but these are things that you need to consider. And we started doing it ourselves. So having that device for us has been great. I mentioned signage, whether it's on the floors, in the conference rooms, throughout the facility. I think signage is pretty important. I think it puts people at ease, and it helps keep it ever present in people's minds, how the space is supposed to be utilized. Mask usage, this is an evolving one. As we speak today, we are still under, when we tell people if they come in the office, if they are working, and we're still haven't had a lot of people come back, so it's easier to manage. If you're working in a office with a shut door, or a conference room with a shut door, and since we don't have a lot of people and we've been using more office space now, but eventually we can't do that. We're gonna need to move people back to the cubes. We tell them they wear a mask unless you're in an office alone. Well, it's not harder to do that. We'll continue to be our guidance, but it makes it a bit of a challenge to tell people they have to come back and sit at their desk the whole day. They're in meetings with a mask on, working using MS Teams to have those meetings. When they're at home, they don't have that mask on usually. I haven't seen that much. Usually they're in their own space and whatnot. So that's a challenge. In some of these roles, these are people that are potentially in call center type roles that are fielding member calls and whatnot, and then told to wear a mask all day as they talk through it. That's a big piece here that is something that's isn't going to go away anytime soon. Vaccine considerations. We've been asked by our employees, are we going to provide vaccines on site? The answer for us is no. I don't think that's going to be pretty tough. I would be surprised if a lot of organizations could do that unless they were of a huge magnitude size. Although, I'm sure that'd be possible for some. But this isn't as mature, this vaccine rollout, as a flu vaccine rollout, where sometimes people would do that on site. So this is a whole nother concern. And we've also been asked about, are we going to require vaccines for in-office staff? Are we going to require them to show a card that they have had a vaccine and whatnot? These are all things that require a lot of discussion. There's HIPAA concerns, there's legal concerns. So there's a lot baked into the whole vaccine discussion. It seems sometimes easy, just require them. Well, there is legal considerations here that need to be addressed and discussed. And temperature checks. We've seen a lot of temperature checks. If you go to the gym or at certain locations, at schools that are in session that I've seen. So that's another thing that has been brought up. And there's considerations there. People didn't. Most organizations didn't have money allocated to hire someone to take temperature checks. Is the person that's a receptionist, are they going to just take temperature checks? They might not feel comfortable doing that. Who's going to feel comfortable doing this? So, if you've been into a hospital during COVID times, unfortunately, I've been in way too often with some situations with my parents. Those things that they have at these hospitals are not going to be affordable for most organizations, that you walk through and it just, puts on a monitor your temperature. Those are going to be extremely expensive, and obviously that equipment is probably not going to be usable in the future. Let's hope, right? Let's hope that there's not another COVID next year or you need to use it again. So, I mean, these are all considerations, and some of them come down to money. A couple other things. The use of shared space. I think everyone realizes there's going to be a lot of sensitivity to the use of shared space, including things that we took for granted in the past. Maybe someone went and used um, the break room and they got some coffee and a little spilled. Okay, let's say the break room gets cleaned every 2 hours. Well, in this instance, 5 minutes later, someone goes in, they get some coffee, and they say, "Oh, this wasn't cleaned," and they email, "Well, no, this facility isn't clean." Well, no, it's clean. It gets cleaned every 2 hours. If somebody spilled these type of things, though, in the past, maybe people probably just clean it up themselves, or just whatever it is, what it is, it'll get cleaned soon. Now there's going to be a heightened sense of awareness on all these things in managing these complaints. I mean, I've struggled with this myself, and our team has. I like to try and make everyone happy and whatnot. It's just not going to be possible. You try and ease people's concerns and take a pragmatic and practical approach to this, but sometimes that just means, you know, eh, people may not like the answer. Sometimes, but you have to have principles in place and guidelines in place that make sense and are based on, the protocols provided by the city, state, and whatnot.
Hey, Chris,
Yes,
we have a good question here that kind
sure.
of goes hand in hand with. Obviously, there's a lot of information that there's needs to be communicated to employees. How did you handle communicating that? Did you use webinars, town halls, emails? There's a lot of information you had to get out there. How'd you do that?
Um, so we used, we used a lot of webinars to gather information. We conducted a lot of calls, using Teams and whatnot to keep engaged with people. I participated myself in a lot of webinars to gather information and bring it back to the team. That included with real estate organizations, with some of the partners that I'd mentioned, like Gensler and whatnot. And you know, I I mean, I also like have listened to a lot of podcasts about COVID, about return to work, about vaccine distribution to educate myself as someone in the risk management profession as much as possible. I didn't have to do that, but I felt like it was something I was interested in and it was relevant to my job. So I spent a lot of my personal time doing that. We kept our employees engaged by large scale meetings conducted via Zoom. We had a couple quarterly meetings where we discussed this. We tried to address employees' concerns, and we made full use of our intranet and a employee resource page with a lot of information regarding frequently asked questions, links to resources, and whatnot to help explain where we were at on things to keep people abreast of the situation.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Chris.
So now I'll looking into like what are some of the long-term considerations for us? What is what this is a new normal. I mean, this is something this country really hasn't seen before. In many countries, particularly in Asia, where they've seen some of these things with SARS and whatnot. We really haven't seen a lot of this in the United States. Like I strongly believe the United States, the next time this does happen, and I think it'll certainly happen again. I think it's a certainty. Hopefully it's a long time out, but this will happen again. We're going to be much more prepared to deal with this. Mask, knowing when to use them, when to implement the usage of them during upticks, et cetera. We'll be much more concerned. But there's going to be a new normal from a health considerations and from an overall work perspective. So safety is number one. That's stated by our organization. But we need to manage the concerns and differing viewpoints. Throughout our country, there's different viewpoints on a lot of things, including this. Some people may have concerns and everyone's concerns are warranted, but some may be like on one end of the spectrum versus another. Some may feel people shouldn't go back to school until everyone has a vaccine card. Some people may think this. Some people may feel like they shouldn't have this vaccine until it's had 3 cycles, 3 years of doing it until it's, there's a lot of differing viewpoints. And so you have to kind of like really think about these concerns. Safety is number one. And I think this gets into where flexibility of allowing people to come back to work. This is a complicated one. This is really complicated because at some point you really might need to have people come back to work. And, and this kind of, if I could jump down a few points, this gets into company culture concerns. Not every organization was set up to be, some of the Google or Facebook or whomever said that everyone's going to work remotely, or I don't know which ones, so don't paraphrase. But I mean, I'm just saying that some organizations were kind of set up to do that from the get-go, and some fintech companies or technology organizations, that kind of is more or less their model anyway. They're used to hiring people all over the country, and this person lives in Dallas and this person lives in Hawaii, and I'd say more organizations are not set up that way, and they're definitely not in the financial services industry. As a person that's got experience working at banks and whatnot, they're definitely not set up that way. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, they allow people to work from home, but it's not, and it is changing, but this is like a whole new normal. You're taking a process that maybe was happening. Maybe hoteling was kind of happening more, and maybe 10% or 15% of people were working from home. Well, now all of a sudden, boom, 95% of people working from home, or 90% or something. And now you're telling people they need to come back to work. Some people are like, why? I've been able to work remotely. So there's a lot going on here and a lot of different viewpoints. So I think that's why, I feel like I'm a member of the human capital team in our organization now, for all the discussions we have, and everything kind of, it doesn't start and stop with them, but there's a lot of human capital concerns. How can we safely implement hoteling? You only can make things so safe, and there are cost considerations to a lot of things. So this is a challenge to figure out what to put in place, what to put in place that's reusable, what's just going to be a sunk cost. A lot of things to concern. How can you scale it up, scale it down? A lot of things like this. So and there's the one I've noticed during this process is there's no, I don't know. It's almost like with a lot of things in this. There isn't even any 100% right answers. It's a lot of like gray, and that's challenging for everyone. So you have to try and just really think about the options, and you're still going to be hit some curveballs. Organizational changes support hoteling in a hybrid workforce. So I mentioned this hybrid workforce before. So what's a hybrid workforce? Well, you got people that are 100% remote, or it works for certain roles that can work. For us, we might have, maybe we had 1% of people that were 100% remote before, and now maybe we're going to be at like 10% of people remote. I don't know, give or take. 100% in office before, we were probably like, I don't know, 25 or 30%, 100% in office before, and I bet you we're going to be more like 10 or 15%, 100% in office, or maybe even less. Now, maybe our hybrid workforce, people that work from home once a week or twice a week, and we're in the rest of the time, that was in the 40s. Now it's going to be in probably 75 to 80. So that's a big change. And it's a big change to support that. That includes the equipment you send home with people. There's cost concerns there. What are you sending home with someone? The 100% remote and the hybrid people, they might get the same package when they get hired, like a laptop, a docking station for home, a keyboard, a mouse, a headset. Headsets, I never realized how important headsets are. When you don't have a phone, a headset's pretty important to use Teams and stuff like that. And, the 100% in office, which is a small number for us and for a lot of organizations, I think. So this is really, this is a huge acceleration with so many concerns. I think culture is a big piece here. Usually it is more the CEO and the C-suite and the human capital team that are most focused on the culture concerns. And I think sometimes people are, not thinking about those things as much outside of those groups. These are big pieces. I mean, you do have to worry about what kind of company you're going to have after all this, and whatnot, and whatever some of the things that were part of your organization. They can't just completely go away. Company culture is important. Long-term real estate implications. Obviously, space, most organizations aren't going to need as much. How much do you have? What kind of lease are you locked into? A lot of considerations here. What are the capital improvements you may want to or need to make to your existing footprint? I mean, some people are trying to get out of their space. Many people are trying to get out of some parts of their lease, but there's a lot of cost considerations there. And that gets down to costs, Costs are going to have to be a consideration, period. Because in this new normal, at least for Alliant, I think for a lot of organizations like us that are going to be pivoting to something different, you can't probably, assume the cost of assigning a cube or office to every employee. It's not practical, and it's not going to be cost prohibitive. If you have 600 spots and you're only going to have 250 people coming in each day, most organizations are, unless they're locked into something they can't get out of, or they can't maybe sublease or something like that, they're not going to just create a bunch of open space. I mean, some will, and I mean, but that is real money that people are spending. So that's a big piece, and that's why I think, it seems a different. I don't know. It completely makes sense, but coming out of a pandemic to say you're going to implement hoteling is is an interesting concept, but it also makes sense given all the other things that are happening. We've kind of like to look at it like, in the future, your me space is your home space. Your my space, that's at home. And your office space is for when you come into a hotel maybe twice a week. So it's a different, versus having your cube every day where you leave stuff on and whatnot. Who are the key engagement partners in managing this whole return to work? I think we've touched on a lot of this throughout, but I wanted to come back to some specifics. So technology, technology is doing a lot of the work on this. A lot of the office build out, getting hoteling cubes ready, making sure printers are set up. I mean, we shut down a lot of our printers, and then we turn them back on. I mean, they work, and we still had some on, but we certainly don't need the same numbers. Who gets rid of all that equipment? We have a lot of printers that need to be recycled, like basically, which means they need to be thrown out. I mean, there's a lot there. Equipment, the in-office and hoteling setup, sending this home. What happens with every new employee going forward? Hybrid workers, what do they get? The support of in-office staff versus remote staff. This gets down to like the service desk and whatnot, or your technology help desk. Fortunately, we've had a year to do this for most organizations. So the service desk or support desk has figured out how to support staff and get them to work efficiently. But I mean, now you're going back to a new model. People have got comfortable at home and working from home and whatnot. Now they're going to come back into the office. They're going to plug their laptop into a different cube each time they come in, and maybe one of the monitors doesn't come up, or they're used to this kind of monitor they bought at home. These are all things that are potentially impactful, and then it could impact staffing for a new support model. It's hard to even say, even for like my team. I mean, do I have enough staff to support this? Because we got to support a hotel reservation. I mean, I think so. I mean, I don't know. When I hired the person I hired, I didn't know we were going to have to do that. But some of their other job responsibilities went away. And by the way, I don't have any more money to hire anybody else. But this is staffing for a new support model is another consideration that we're jumping into things that we really don't know. So, and some of this, it's going to take a while to know until people start to use the space and whatnot. Human resources or human capital in our case. What policies do need to be developed? I mean, there's new policies, whether it's modified remote work policies, changes to equipment. What do you do with the equipment if someone is terminated or quits? Or do they send it back? Do we want it back? I mean, a lot, how do we just, dispose of it, in a way that there's no privacy information, printing concerns, lots of things. What about staff that moved out of town? So during COVID, I think a lot of organizations, if someone said they're moving out of town, or maybe they didn't even tell people, tell the organization, they moved out of town. Yeah, probably really wouldn't even know, although, people can find out for sure. Well, what about you change your culture and say, oh, actually, we're not going to, there's state labor laws that we don't really want to have people in Idaho or, Wyoming or whatever. Are you going to tell those people now they got to move out of town? Or are you going to tell them that they no longer have a job? I don't have the answers to those questions, but those are certainly relevant questions that need to be considered. How do we encourage or entice staff to come back? I mean, again, this gets in on, are you asking or are you telling? Or do we? And when do you do this? There's never going to be a good time for some people. Never. And, that's a tough one. We're trying to kind of handle it where we allow people to come back organically with a kind of a soft rollout, so to speak. It's available if you want to use it, fine. Here, follow these guidelines. But eventually, over time, that's not gonna be enough. We're gonna have to probably do a little bit of pushing to get more people back in the office. We kind of hope that it'll be a soft push, but we have to manage that. And the when's the key there. Trying to we're not in a hurry to push people back in the office either. Let this happen over time, but we're just kind of trying to slowly move back to something a little bit more normal. But again, it is a new normal. Managing employees' expectations. When you got a lot of employees in any organization, you're going to have a lot of expectations. We can manage some of this by frequently asked questions. I think it's best to just be upfront and tell you, here's what we're doing. You can't, make everyone happy, and you're not going to be able to manage everyone's expectation. Some people are going to be 100% in their mind. I'm not coming into the office unless somebody grabs it, has somebody wear show every day they come in, they need their temperature taken, and they need to show that they've gotten the vaccine. That's an understandable expectation. It's probably not one that every organization can grant from legal reasons, from people's personal health and whatnot. But I mean, you're going to have those expectations. You're going to have other expectations about space, about wearing masks, So I think it's best to actually write out the frequently asked questions. Work with human resources. My team's worked with human resource to develop answers to the frequently asked questions, leveraging what is said to the CDC and whatnot. But you're going to have to work through some of this yourself. You can't just, there isn't. The government doesn't usually give extremely concrete answers on this stuff. So you're going to need to figure out what works for your organization. Of course, leveraging those resources is essential, but I think the frequently asked questions, it's good to have those written out. You do not want to be rehearsing and rehashing, answering someone's question every time. I learned some of this frequently asked questions in my previous job when I rolled out, as Don mentioned, a active shooter awareness program. And as I did this throughout various states in the country, got a lot of questions about guns and bringing guns into work. And I met with human resources and legal, and I said, we have to have like answers to these things that I am not, I mean, that are based on the laws that we have and our employee relations guidance. So, and this has really benefited us to have these FAQs to pivot off of. We're given the same answer each time. A few more things on key engagement partners. Facilities, as I mentioned before, for a hybrid workforce, my space is at home. What are the employee expectations when they're offered? What kind of health and safety protocols are needed? Again, signage, mask, sanitizer, HEPA filters, wipes. Do we have to put wipes on every desk? Can you even get that many wipes? Fortunately, it's easier to get masks and wipes than it was a year ago. Sanitizer, but these are all thoughts. The cleaning frequency, which we talked about. Again, those things all cost additional money. There's a lot of extra money, baked into this. I know for my organization, we budgeted a significant amount of extra money for 2021 just for COVID related stuff like this. Like, what if we need to buy, we're probably not going to be taking temperatures at this juncture, but I said, what if we do need to buy a few of these temperature machines that were $5,000 to $7,000 a piece? So we tried to budget for them up front rather than ask for it later. Divisional management, what are the expectations? How are they enforced? How do we make people feel safe? There's different populations within every company, different groups within finance versus risk versus operations versus technology. So a lot there to think about. And this is the last one I have listed. It's certainly not the last one, but it's the last one that I really got into is security. How does that new work model impact security? Security also reports through me in Alliance, so this is something that I've been thinking about just, in terms of badging. I mean, there are people going to be able to come back at some point. Are we going to mail them their badge? I mean, we're holding them for people until they do come in, but we had a process in place. You're a new employee, you get badged, you take a picture, here you go. Things like that. Is there more prevalence of online profiles? Are we going to enforce, having a certain type of online profile in more than we did before? It's something you don't really think about until you realize that you're used to seeing people maybe once in a while or something, and then you never see them because they live in a different state and whatnot. And maybe there is some, even some information security concerns about somebody calling the help desk and asking for information. And if you don't know who they are, or you can't verify any information, including there's a lot of considerations on security. And then onboarding and offboarding. Hiring people, letting them go. I've hired 2 people during the pandemic, and I never met, one of them during an interview. One of them right before it started, we got at least one of the interviews in, and then offboarding. I mean, if somebody's let go or they quit or whatnot, a lot of different concerns about security, getting equipment, and many other things. So a lot of things to think about. So, I've been talking for a while. I've covered a lot of information. I have some time for additional questions if anyone has any additional questions. And on the last page here, I do have my email if anyone has any questions they want to address to me specifically around any of these topics. But before I let any questions come on, I will say that this has been a really interesting year in my career. I'm not going to say I'm surprised because I've been doing this kind of work before that we're going to have a pandemic. I'm not surprised we had a pandemic, but I mean, who knows when that kind of stuff's going to happen and what kind of response. We've had some stuff in the past where there was H1N1 and a few other things, and SARS. I was just getting into this industry during SARS, and H1N1 I was definitely in for that, but it never went full on. It kind of just, fortunately it didn't take hold like this one did across the world. And all the things that I remember during H1N1 saying, boy, all these WHO protocols, technically, we're supposed to be doing all these things, but none of this seems to make sense. Well, all those things we had to do this time. And so it's been a very interesting year in my career that has forced me to, I don't know, to reconsider a lot of things. But it has been, hate to say it, rewarding also. But I'll leave it with that.
Okay, thank you, Chris. We're almost out of time, but let's try and squeeze in a couple of quick questions if we can. Next question for you, Chris, then is, and this goes back to earlier in your presentation, how will your facility's emergency procedures, including fire evacuation and sheltering in place, be altered to avoid close contact and yet still be effective?
Well, I mean, we didn't have we did a shelter in place, and we did a facility. We did a self-evacuation drill last year for the people that were in the office. We told them to go at their own times and do it at their own times. We said, hey, just do it throughout the day. We just told them to walk out like their car for the people that were in the office. So we actually were able to manage that fine because we didn't have a lot of people in. This year we're going to have to really think about that. If we're comfortable, having people all go to a same rally point type location, we'll have to see about that. I mean, the locations didn't physically change, but we were able to manage it with the small amount of people we had in last year. But going forward, that will be a little bit of a challenge. Maybe we'll need to force them to wear masks this year. I don't know when they evacuate, but they'll probably still have masks on anyway. So that might work out for itself. But we were able to manage it with the small in-person staff by just kind of adjusting our procedures and telling people to do a self-evacuation to make sure they were familiar with their exit points and rally point locations and shelter-in-place locations.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We've reached a little bit past the top of the hour, but I want to thank you, Chris, and I want to let everybody know we had a lot of great questions, and we had a lot of great questions we didn't get to as well. But Chris has indicated that he will reply to anyone who did submit a question directly as well. And as he mentioned, if you have anything additional you'd like to find out, you can contact him directly, and you see his email address is right there on the screen. And I also want to let everybody know, because I got a lot of requests for this. Yes, we will be making a copy of the slides available for everyone, and you'll be receiving those from me tomorrow. So as we wrap up, I'd like to thank you again, Chris, and I'd like to thank everyone who attended today's webinar, How to Prepare the Workplace for a Return to Work. On behalf of Continuity Insights, Chris Sarcletti, and our corporate sponsor, OnSolve, we hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.